All right, diving in today, something I think we can all relate to, anger.
Oh, yeah. Definitely universal.
You know, you sent us this book, The Art of Anger Management by Alok Kumar.
Hmm.
And I think we're all hoping for some really practical, like in the moment things we can do when we feel that anger rising. So, what's the mission today? How do we distill all this down to the good stuff, the things we can actually use?
I think what's so interesting about Kumar's approach right off the bat is he kind of flips the script on how we usually think about anger.
Yeah.
Like his book, The Art of Anger Management, transform anger into power and peace. It's really small, only 77 pages, but it's packed with these really actionable insights. He basically says anger can be this like almost positive force, that it can help us grow and even improve our relationships.
Okay, so anger is a good thing. That feels a little bit backwards. We're always told to just calm down, don't get angry, let it go.
Right.
He's saying it's not the emotion itself, it's how we handle it.
Exactly. It's like, think about the check engine light in your car.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a good thing, but it's a signal.
Yeah.
It's telling you to pay attention to something.
Okay, I like that. So it's like a warning light, not necessarily the problem itself.
Exactly. And Kumar really gets into like the nuts and bolts of what's happening in our brains and bodies when we experience anger.
Okay.
Like he talks about the psychological and physiological mechanisms, the whole 9 yards. He really wants us to see that anger is just part of being human.
Right.
I think the key takeaway for our listeners is to remember that. It's not about pretending you don't feel anger. It's about understanding that it's normal and then figuring out what to do with it.
Got it. So if we accept that anger is just part of the human experience, what's the next step? How do we, manage it so it doesn't manage us? The book talks about identifying anger triggers.
Right. He really emphasizes knowing yourself.
Yeah.
Like really taking the time to pinpoint what sets you off, what are the situations, the people, even like those little thought patterns that trigger those really strong, angry feelings. Mm-hmm. And what's really insightful is he says, don't just stop at, I get angry when I'm stuck in traffic.
Yeah.
Like go deeper. Ask yourself, why does that specific thing make me so angry?
So it's not just my boss makes me angry. It's what is it about my boss's behavior that's actually triggering me?
Exactly. Is it that you feel micromanaged?
Mm.
Or maybe like you're not being recognized for your work? Or maybe it's the way they criticize you that it feels unfair.
Right, right. So it's almost like detective work, but with your own emotions.
Totally. And that kind of self-reflection, that's the first practical step Kumar suggests. When you start paying attention to those patterns, those triggers, you start to unlock some really important stuff about yourself.
Okay, so you've done your detective work. You know what your triggers are.
Yeah.
What then? Does the book give us some strategies for dealing with that anger when it shows up?
Oh, definitely. He talks about a whole bunch of practical coping techniques, things you can start trying right away, like mindfulness, for example.
Mindfulness.
Yeah. Basically, it's just about paying attention to what's happening in the moment without judgment. You're not getting swept away by your thoughts or emotions. You're just observing them.
Got it.
He also talks about breathing exercises.
Okay.
Like really focusing on your breath can actually help regulate your body's stress response.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's cognitive reframing, which is basically about changing the way you think about the situation that's making you angry.
Cognitive reframing. So like if you're thinking this person is deliberately trying to make my life harder, you try to reframe it to maybe they're just having a bad day.
Right. Or maybe they're under a lot of pressure and not thinking clearly.
Yeah, yeah.
The book gives you specific techniques for identifying those unhelpful thought patterns and kind of shifting them towards something more realistic.
Okay.
For breathing exercises, he might suggest something like the 4-7-8 method.
What's that?
You inhale deeply through your nose for a count of 4, hold your breath for a count of 7, and then exhale slowly through your mouth for a count of 8. Yeah, it sounds simple, but it can be really effective for calming your nervous system down when you feel that anger bubbling up.
I like that. Something you can do anywhere, anytime. Now, the review also mentioned mindfulness and communication. How do those fit into the anger management picture?
They go hand in hand, really.
Yeah.
Mindfulness, as we talked about, isn't just for those moments when you're already angry.
Right.
It's about cultivating a general awareness of your emotions, like all the time.
Okay.
So if you're paying attention to how you feel, you can catch those early warning signs of anger before they escalate.
Gotcha.
And then communication comes in. If you can clearly and respectfully communicate your needs and boundaries, you can actually prevent a lot of those anger-inducing situations from happening in the first place.
Oh, I see. So it's not just about dealing with anger when it hits, it's about preventing it too.
Exactly.
By being more aware of what we're feeling, we can communicate more effectively, and that can lead to fewer conflicts.
Right. Like if you notice that you're starting to feel tense or irritated, you can say, hey, can we take a break? I'm feeling a little overwhelmed right now.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Now, the review also talked about something pretty interesting, this connection between anger and other emotions. Can you elaborate on that a little?
So Kumar makes this point that sometimes anger is actually a secondary emotion.
Okay.
It's like a mask for other, maybe more vulnerable feelings. Things like fear, anxiety, sadness, even feeling helpless.
So someone might lash out in anger, but underneath they're actually feeling hurt or scared.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the anger is the tip of the iceberg, and underneath there's this whole mass of other emotions going on.
Interesting. So it's not always what it seems on the surface.
Right. And by recognizing that, we can start to address those root causes of the anger, which can be much more effective in the long run.
It's like the alarm system going off, but we need to figure out what's actually setting it off, not just hit the snooze button.
Exactly. So for our listeners, it might be worth asking yourselves, in those moments when you feel angry, what else might be going on underneath?
That's a great point. Now, overall, the review was pretty positive about this book.
Yeah.
What were some of the things that really stood out as strengths?
Well, the reviewer really emphasized the practical, actionable advice.
Mm-hmm.
Kumar doesn't just talk about anger in theory. He gives you concrete tools and exercises to help you manage it.
Like what?
Like, he has prompts for self-reflection and actual techniques you can use in the moment when you're feeling angry. It's not just a bunch of vague advice.
That's really important. You know, it's one thing to understand the why behind your anger, but it's another thing to have actual tools to deal with it in real life.
Exactly. And the reviewer also praised the clear, straightforward language.
Okay.
He avoids all that complicated jargon, which makes the book really accessible for anyone, even if you don't have a background in psychology.
I think that's so key. Sometimes you pick up a self-help book and it feels like you need a PhD to understand it.
Right. And then another big strength is the way he reframes anger as something positive.
Yeah.
He challenges that idea that anger is always bad and shows how it can actually be a source of energy and motivation for change.
It's about harnessing that energy, not just trying to suppress it.
Exactly. The reviewer also liked that he included real-life examples and case studies.
Oh, yeah. Those can be really helpful.
Yeah, it helps to see how these principles actually play out in different situations.
Right. And the last thing.
Well, the fact that it's a really short book is a plus. It's just 77 pages, so you can get through it pretty quickly.
That's great for people who don't have a lot of time to dedicate to reading, but still want to learn.
Definitely.
Now, even the best books have areas where they could be even better, right? Were there any things the reviewer thought could be improved?
Yeah, a couple things. They thought it could benefit from going a little deeper into long-term lifestyle changes that can support emotional well-being, like things like managing chronic stress, the importance of sleep, even the role of nutrition in regulating our moods.
Right.
All those things play a huge role in our overall emotional health, and the book could have explored those a bit more.
Makes sense. So, more of the big picture stuff. What else?
The reviewer also suggested incorporating more scientific research to support the recommendations.
Okay.
Like referencing studies and data that back up the claims.
Right. You know, sometimes it's helpful to see that evidence.
Definitely. And lastly, they thought adding more personal anecdotes from the author's own life could make it even more engaging for readers.
Yeah, I agree. It's always nice to hear how the author has applied these principles themselves.
It makes it feel more relatable.
Okay, so bringing it back to our listeners who suggested this book, who do you think would really benefit from reading The Art of Anger Management?
I think, based on the review, it sounds like it would be especially helpful for a few groups of people. First, anyone who's really struggling with managing their anger and is looking for some practical tools to help them. Second, anyone who wants to learn more about their own emotional responses, like maybe they want to boost their emotional intelligence.
Got it.
And third, anyone who wants to learn some quick and easy anger management techniques that they can start using right away.
And we already talked about how the book's conciseness makes it really approachable, even for busy people.
Totally. It's a great starting point.
All right, so to wrap up our deep dive into Alok Kumar's The Art of Anger Management, we've learned that the book offers this really interesting perspective on anger. It encourages us to see it not just as this negative emotion, but as something that can actually fuel positive change if we handle it correctly.
Right.
It highlights how important it is to understand our own personal anger triggers.
Yeah.
and to develop coping mechanisms like mindfulness, cognitive reframing, and clear communication.
Exactly. And we also talked about how sometimes anger can be a signal that there are other deeper emotions at play that we need to address.
Exactly. And we discussed the book's strengths, the practical advice, the easy-to-understand language, the positive perspective on anger, the real-life examples, and the concise format.
Right.
We also touched on those areas where it could be expanded upon, like including more information about long-term lifestyle choices, scientific research, and personal stories from the author.
Yeah.
So, as a final thought for our listeners, and something for you to consider, Kumar emphasizes this idea of anger as a potential force for positive change. So what's one area in your own life where instead of just trying to suppress or ignore your anger, you could actually use it constructively to create some positive change? It's a question worth exploring. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.